So thank everybody for coming along today. This is our sixth webinar in our Eco October series. I'd like to welcome our special guest Hannah and also our participants for coming along today. This webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto our website for future reference. Before I hand the floor over to Hannah, I'd just like to highlight some of the opportunities that we have for our businesses in Uttlesford. So this is our team. There's myself, Rachel and Sarah. So we form the economic development team. We're here to provide on-hand support for our businesses. We signpost for any financial support, job opportunities, and also any grants that are available. As well as the series of webinars, we're also providing a low carbon workplace grant. So that's a £5,000 match funded grant. And this is for our businesses that are wanting to reduce their carbon footprint. Some of the items it can be used for are materials and equipment, retrofitting, LED lighting, solar panels, business consultation, carbon literacy training. And also, if you go along to our website, there are many other items that this grant can be used for. We're also providing one-on-one consultation. So this is a 1-hour consultation, taking a deeper look at individual cases and identifying problems and solutions. This has proven very, very popular and successful, and we only have a few spaces left available, and it does complement the grant very nicely. So it just gives you an idea of maybe some of the goals that you can achieve, or also maybe there's some sustainability matters that you're not aware of that this will highlight. We're also offering business coaching. So we have a 6-hour online group session and 2-hour one-on-one private sessions. This is fully funded, so it's completely free for our businesses. The only bit that we have left is I came with an idea and I left with a business. We have 2 spaces available. So if you're interested in that, then please go onto our website and subscribe. We're offering 4 grants as well. So at the moment we have the Business Startup Grant. So that's a £2,500 match funded grant, and that's for our businesses that are for 2 years or younger. We have our High Street Premises Enhancement Fund. This is a £5,000 match funded grant, and this is solely used to enhance the front of your premises. We have the Rural England Prosperity Fund, and we have the Low Carbon Workplace Grant, which I mentioned previously. On our website, we have a free to download startup guide. This guide is incredibly useful and it gives you all the information, everything you need to know if you're starting up your business. We've recently updated our website and we've improved our directory. So this is, again, free for all of our businesses to sign up for. This is resident facing. So if your business is on here, our residents can see it. And also it's very good for our businesses if they want to collaborate with each other. So we do strongly advise, if you haven't done so already, then please go onto our website and sign up for our business directory. And finally, we have our e-newsletter. So this goes out fortnightly and it's ideal to keep everybody up to date in regards to the current advice and support that we have available. So again, if you haven't already subscribed for this, then please go onto our website and do so, and it'll just keep you up to date with the advice and support that we have ready for you. So without any further delays, I'd like to hand the floor over to our guest speaker, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah.
Great, thank you. Wow, what an incredible amount of support you've got for businesses. That was fantastic to hear all of that. Okay, I am going to share some slides and then we'll get going. Has that worked okay, do you think? Can you see the slides? Yeah, cooking on gas. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. My name is Hannah Smith. I'll introduce myself in a moment. I'm going to present to you about digital sustainability for small businesses. Now, my aim today, I really want to make this session as interactive as possible. And I'd love some input and feedback from you. It's very lonely when you're a presenter on your own in a room and you can't see anyone's faces and you don't know how people are responding to things. So I thought the way that maybe we could try and get around that is I would love to encourage you to use the chat program here in Teams. You should see a little icon, possibly I think towards the top of your screen, it'll say chat. And I would love to hear from you in the chat. As we go, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got things you would like to share, let's get chatty with one another, because we can have a nice time doing that as well. So you don't just have to listen to me, you can also participate. And I will have a warm-up question for you where I would hope for some participation. We're all going to have a go at measuring the carbon emissions of our website shortly. And yeah, so I'll get onto that in a sec. I can see some of you are already typing, so I'm really chuffed to see that. And yeah, please give me a little bit of your energy through the chat today if you can. I would really appreciate it. So Andy and Sarah have invited me to come along and share some knowledge with you about digital sustainability for small businesses today. I'll introduce myself to you first. So my name is Hannah Smith. I live in the west of the country, actually. I live in the southwest. I live in the county of Somerset in Exmoor National Park. This is a picture taken in Exmoor National Park with my dog Lily. Lily, I've been giving speeches and talks for a very long time now, and I've managed to sneak her into every single presentation I've ever done. So I've snuck her in today here as well. I'm Director of Operations for a non-profit called the Green Web Foundation. We exist to make the internet just and sustainable. We're particularly focused on making the internet fossil free as well. And I'll tell you a bit more about our organisation as we go. I also, in the southwest of England, run a meetup called Green Tech Southwest. Actually, all of our events are always online, so if you do find that you're really interested in the topic of green tech, you'll be most welcome to attend online, or of course, if you fancy coming to Bristol, where we host them in person, you'll be most welcome to join us. And I'm also very involved with an online community called climateaction.tech. Again, if you find that this whole topic of digital sustainability is of interest to you, that's a free community you can join. And I ran a campaign with them some years back called Let's Green the Web. And then just to give you a little bit of a sense of my background, I have a background in computer science, so I'm pretty technical, and I worked as a freelance web developer for many years too. So that's a little bit about me. I'm hoping we'll hear a little bit about you. I believe we've got 7 or 8 participants on the line. So this will be a nice opportunity for you to meet one another, I hope. So what I wanted to do is I thought it would be a fun way to break the ice a little bit and get us started into the session by asking, do you know the carbon emissions of your website? Now, this is a really interesting question to pose because often people say, no, I don't know the carbon emissions of my website, and I certainly didn't even realize that websites have a carbon emission. And we'll find out today how websites have a carbon emission and what you can do about it. So I thought a nice starting point would be to ask each of you to follow the link here. And I'm going to type it into the chat for you so you can click on that directly. This is a nice free tool that you can use to measure the carbon emissions of your website. And I thought that'd be a fun way to get things going. And wonderful. How lovely to meet you, Michael. Thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. That's really nice to have you. And sounds like your role as a sustainable digital special interest group, being the lead officer for that, sounds really relevant. So anyway, I'm hoping then those of you that are there are in your browser at the moment. You are opening up the website carbon calculator tool and you are putting in your website address. And I'm hoping that when you've done that and you've got your result, what you might do is post how you got on in the comments. If you don't want to say which organization's website you've tested, that's fine. You don't have to. If you're embarrassed by the result, no problem at all. But I'd love to know what kind of score you got. And Andy, I know that you measured a certain website recently as well. So if you were able to share the result from that, if you're able to in the chat, that would be really nice to hear from you. And I can see a number of you are typing, so that's a good sign that perhaps you are testing the carbon emissions of your website now. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to see what you have to say. Fantastic. So Michael's saying we have used the calculator before, and we know we have work to do to improve its carbon footprint. Yes, the first step to improving something is to know what your starting point is. Michael, I don't know if you're able to share what result you got, if you feel brave. There's no guilt tripping in this room, by the way. So, but that's great. Thank you, Michael. Okay, I'll just give you a few more minutes because I can see there's lots of typing going on. So let's see what everybody has to say, and then we'll get into it. So Fran, thank you so much, Fran. You've shared that your website is 56% cleaner than the other pages tested. So congratulations, that's absolutely fantastic. Hussein has shared, and now that looks like a university website to me, aru.ac.uk. 0.56 grams of CO2 produced every time someone visits. So I've got a feeling 0.57 I think would be a fairly high emitting website, if I recall rightly. Hussein, if you're able to share what the percentage was, how that rated against others, that'd be helpful. Alana has said cleaner than 62%, fantastic. Andrew has said 56, cleaner than tested, cleaner than others tested. And Jamie has said 0.33 grams of CO2. So again, if my memory serves, that's fairly good, I think, somewhere in the middle. Fantastic. So I love that you've all shared your results. Thank you so much. Let's start talking then about digital sustainability and how websites maybe even have a CO2 emission in the first place. And if anybody else is still typing or wants to share their results or wants to keep chatting, please carry on in the chat as we go. I can see you as I'm talking, and it's not a distraction. It's actually very, very welcome. So, okay. So one of the things that we talk about at the Green Web Foundation is we talk about the internet as being the world's largest coal-powered machine. Internet does use a significant amount of energy, and I will talk to you about how we can join these two things together, how we can say that the internet is the world's largest coal-powered machine. I'll tell you more about that in a second. But the really important thing about this statement is that right now the internet is the world's largest coal-powered machine, but it doesn't actually need to be. There is a lot that we can do as individuals, as businesses, as civil society, as government, as citizens. There's a lot we can do to shift that and change that. So let's talk then. Okay, so I've hopefully piqued your interest with this so far. How can websites and software be unsustainable? So I think it's really important to understand that digital is physical. And what I mean by that is that digital is not floating around harmlessly in the cloud somewhere. It's actually built from resources that are taken from the earth. And I would say that tech firms have done a fantastic job for the last sort of 20 odd years by giving us this idea that tech is the cloud. And we never see the cloud, and we don't really know what the cloud is. And it's certainly not anything in our home or in our neighborhood or something that we see on a daily basis. But the cloud is physical. It has a physical representation, a physical manifestation on this planet. And it's basically data centers that are on somebody's land, that are in somebody's back garden. They might just not be in our back garden. We might not see them, but that doesn't mean they're not there. So I think that that's a really important thing to understand, that when we talk about digital sustainability, we first of all need to appreciate that digital is taken from the earth. It is made up of resources that come from somewhere. And that right now, I think it's very fair to say that the resources that we're taking from the earth to build and run our digital technology, we're just simply taking too much. And this is why we run into issues around sustainability. So software, sometimes it could be really hard to understand how software can be unsustainable. And I don't expect you'll be able to see all the words in the little boxes on this diagram on the right. That's absolutely fine. I really just want you to have a look at the colors. Because what I want to sort of explain to you, or just to give you a sense of, is all the infrastructure that exists beneath the surface of software that maybe we don't see, but that has to be built from something and has to be powered by something. So we think about this, the simple phrase here is software requires a lot of infrastructure to run. Now, if you have a look at that diagram on the right side of the screen, hoping you can all see it, the blue boxes represent software. Now, anybody who's ever built software, you'll probably know that software is made up of lots of different interconnected packages of software that all plug together. So that's why you see software represented. I think there's maybe 10 or 11 different blue boxes there. It's an ecosystem in itself. But beneath all the software is all this other stuff. So we have physical data centers. They're represented by the things in orange. We have the things represented in pink, and that's not data centers. That's other kinds of physical infrastructure that we need to have, such as power stations, such as network routers, such as cables that run under the ocean that connect different localities together. The green boxes down there represent the Earth's resources that need to come out of the Earth and be used. Now, when I'm talking about these resources, I'm talking more specifically about these three things, and we're going to unpack these three things in this session now. I'm talking about energy or electricity. That's a natural resource that we use, that we take from the planet around us. We're also thinking about rare raw materials, or rare raw minerals, I should say. Rare raw minerals is actually really tricky to say fast. It's a great tongue twister. If you kind of want to have a game with your kids around the table, try saying that fast 3 times and see how you get on. So rare raw minerals, I will try and say it clearly, is another kind of natural resource that is really, really, really intrinsic in tech that we often just simply aren't aware about. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll also talk about land and water as well. Again, a very important resource that we need for digital tech. So we're going to talk about these three things. Now, let's start with energy as our first one, because generally, when you first think about digital sustainability, this is often where your mind will go to. You will think about the energy, or rather the electricity, that is plugged into your devices, that is actually powering the hardware around you. So how does digital cause emissions? Well, digital causes emissions from using dirty electricity to power and build tech. And I'm going to talk you through what we mean by dirty electricity in a second, for anybody that's not quite sure. Essentially, the way that we produce electricity can be clean or dirty. The more dirty electricity is, the more CO2 that is produced when we make that is emitted when we make it. So examples of dirty energy production would be things like fossil fuels, so oil, coal and gas, and things that are cleaner would be renewables such as wind, tidal power, which we have some of here in the UK, and also solar. So the energy production, I want just to give you a kind of taster of how dirty and clean electricity is globally. Currently, or I believe in 2021, 62% of the world's electricity came from fossil fuels, and the majority of that is coal-powered stations. 28% comes from renewables, so as I mentioned, solar, wind and tidal, and geothermal as well. And 10% is from nuclear. Now, nuclear is an interesting one. In some people's minds, nuclear energy will fall into green energy. In some people's minds, nuclear will not be clean. And I think it depends a little bit on the definition of sustainability that you're considering. So if you're just thinking about carbon emissions, you'll probably come to the conclusion that nuclear is green. But if you're thinking about wider sustainability impacts, such as what happens with the nuclear waste when we're done with it, you might come to a slightly different conclusion about where nuclear sits on that spectrum. But it is an energy source that is quite widely used. So globally, that's where the world's electricity is coming from. And I gave you quite a provocative statement at the beginning. I said, hey, the internet is the world's largest coal-powered machine. And that's because of what we see here, because globally, the majority of our energy is actually coming from fossil fuels, coming from coal. And that's how the internet is powered. Now, I've given you some numbers about how electricity is made globally. I think it's important context to have as well to understand that regionally in different countries and even different areas of countries, those proportions can dramatically shift. So here I've taken some data from a website called Our World in Data. I don't know if anyone here is a data nerd like I am. I love looking at infographics, charts, data. Give me a spreadsheet any day, and I'm very, very happy. I hope some of you might feel the same. And if you are a nerdy person like me, and you haven't found Our World in Data, I would cancel your weekend and go and get on that website, because it's full of absolutely fantastic data. So this is a screenshot I've taken from their data set, which is the carbon emissions of electricity by country. And again, we've got the same colour scheme as we had before. Fossil fuels are represented by grey, nuclear by purple, renewables by green. Now, if we have a look at the top of that chart and we have a look at, say, South Africa, we can see that actually the energy produced in South Africa comes from 88% fossil fuels. And there's a small amount of nuclear and a small amount of renewables. And if we come all the way down to the bottom of that chart and we have a look at Norway, we can see is powered 100% by renewables. Now, okay, you might be thinking, Hannah, what is this? How is this relevant to me in a small as a small business based in Uttlesford? You know, what does this mean to me? Well, when you think about tech, tech is actually a very global resource. And where you choose to have a data center or where you run a data center from, depending on what the energy mix of that country or region is, will depend on how carbon emitting that data center is or isn't. So, for example, data centers that are sited in Norway, which actually physically aren't really all that far from us here in the UK, will be much greener and will produce a lot less carbon emissions than, say, something located in Japan, for example. Japan, 71% of those emissions. So there's something to think about when you're choosing data centers and when you're buying services from hosting companies. You can ask them, hey, where is this data center located, please? And you can ask them, can you please tell me how green or not green that data center is? And you'll be able to stack up their answer based on information like this, based on how green or not green the energy in that area is. So that's why I wanted to talk you through that, because actually where your data center is located is a choice that you as a small business often have some agency over. And it can be, hopefully you can see from this kind of information, a big difference. And regionally, it can be different too. So data centers based up in Scotland, where they actually have quite a lot of wind power, can be much better than data centers based down in London that might be drawing more energy from our fossil fuels. So there's some things to think about there. And I hope that's kind of got you thinking a little bit. So we've talked about the energy grid. We've talked about where energy comes from. I thought it might be interesting just to put some CO2 emissions in perspective for you. So how much globally is digital actually responsible for in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions? How much of a problem is this? Well, the best estimates that we have suggest that digital is responsible for between 2.1 and 3.9% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I can see that somebody's put their hand up there. I think maybe that was Daniel. Daniel, if you have a question, I'd be really grateful if you could pop it in the chat rather than us kind of enabling people's microphones, because I think that might be slightly easier. If you can't put anything in the chat, keep your hand up, and perhaps we'll see about enabling you. So I can't see you typing in the chat. Andy, shall we have a go at unmuting and see what the question is?
Daniel, you should be able to unmute yourself, Daniel.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Daniel, if you manage to unmute yourself and ask your question, then that would be fantastic. Because I'm not sure if maybe you put your hand up by accident. I'm not sure. Okay, I'll move on. So digital is responsible for between 2.1 and 3.9% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So I mean, out of context, that number probably doesn't mean very much to you. It certainly didn't mean very much to me the first time I heard it. But to put it into context for you, that kind of level of emissions puts digital technologies as the world's 7th biggest polluter if it were a country. And it's more than the aviation and shipping sectors, which is quite a significant issue. Now, a lot of people, you might have heard digital compared to the aviation sector a lot. Actually, at the Green Web Foundation, we prefer to compare it to shipping. The reason is that not everybody has access to aviation. Only 20% of the world's population has access to aviation, has access to flying, whereas the shipping industry is far more beneficial to the world's population. So, for example, most of our goods and services are shipped around the world on ships. And so is a lot of our fuel, actually, as well. I read something very interesting the other day that said if we phased out fossil fuels entirely, 50% of the world's ships would no longer need to sail around the ocean, because actually what they're doing is transporting fossil fuels. I found that really, really interesting. But anyway, the shipping industry is around, just to put into context, is around 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions, as is aviation as well. That's about 2% as well. Now, coming back to the tech sector, one of the things that is a little bit worrying about the tech sector is the speed at which those emissions are growing. And I think it's important to understand that on an individual level, most digital activities that we have are very, very small. Sending an email is 0.001 of a gram of CO2. It's very, very little. As you saw, that loading a web page is often a very small amount of CO2 as well, especially if you've got a good one, a well-performing website. But the issue around digital emissions is the growth and the quantity of stuff we do on digital as well. So I think this is a really interesting chart. I think this really puts into perspective the size of the challenge that we have around digital technologies. So we'll share these slides with you afterwards, at the end, by the way. And everything in here, there's loads of links. You can click on all of this stuff and follow up. This is a really interesting. So this has come from an interesting paper that says that by 2040, the emissions from computing, e.g. digital, alone will be more than half the emissions level acceptable to keep global warming between 1.5 degrees C. So we know that we need, as a society, to reduce our CO2 emissions, and you can see where they are at the moment on the left of that chart versus where they need to be in the future. If tech continues to grow, so with the explosion of AI, the explosion of video gaming, the explosion of just all the data that we send and receive, if those projections continue as we think, by 2040, just IT alone will be using more than half of the global CO2 budget. So that squeezes out food, transport, basic energy needs, all of that. So at the moment, we're on track to prioritize tech over other kinds of basic human needs. So I think that puts a good size and scale on the issue. Okay, so we've only got an hour for this session, and I did really want to make this interactive. So if you've got any questions, please jump into the chat. Daniel, I think you've still got your hand up. I don't think you've been able to unmute, but you're welcome to put your question or your comment in the chat if you have it. So I want just then to take this to a little bit of a discussion around how SMEs can take on board what I've said, and hopefully the context I've given you, and use your energy more wisely for your digital technologies. So I already talked a little bit about switching to a verified green hosting provider. Switching data centers. Now, at the Green Web Foundation, one of the cool things that we do is we have the world's only data set, and I mean, because it's the only one, it's the largest, but it is quite big anyway. And we have a data set around what hosting companies are powered by renewable or green energy. And that data is surfaceable to people such as yourselves through our Green Web directory. And that will allow you to find hosting providers that are green and are able to back up their claims. Because I'm sure many of you will have heard of the term greenwashing. It's prevalent in the tech industry as much as it is in the packaging industry or the clothing industry or any other industry. So all the hosting providers listed in the Green Web Directory are verified as green. So they have demonstrated with strong evidence that they can actually back up their claims. Excuse me, I just need a quick drink. So if you think that your website hosting provider isn't green, this is a great tool that can help you. And as I mentioned already, that switch might feel like a small step for you, but can actually make a huge difference if everybody does it together. Now, one of the other things that you can do is, aside from switching your hosting provider, you can also think about how performant your website is. Now, performant is just a techie term for saying how quick or small your website is. And at the beginning of this session, you all had a go at using the website carbon calculator tool just to get a sense of what your website emissions might be. And essentially, I've got three tools up here on the screen for you, because website carbon calculator is not the only free one out there. There's also one called EcoGrader and another one called EcoPing as well. And they all do slightly different things. And they all give you slightly different insights and slightly different suggestions. But essentially, what all three of these tools are doing is looking at how much data you are sending for each page view that's happening. So as you're probably aware, you've got things like the amount of text will require a certain file size, images will require a certain file size, as will videos as well. And the more of that stuff you're sending for every page load, we call it the heavier your website, or to put it back into technical terms, the less performant it is. So the lighter you can make your website, the less energy that website will consume overall. And as I mentioned there, if you measured your website and you got a bit of a bad result, I would suggest that the first thing you want to do is have a look at the images and the videos, the media basically that you're loading on your website. There's lots and lots of techniques out there that can maintain the same kind of quality and experience on your website, but just do it in a lighter, quicker way. And of course, I don't know how many of you live in rural areas. I live in a rural area. My internet literally comes over the hill on a wire. I don't have sort of a ultra fast fiber or anything like that. It is so frustrating as well being on a website that's slow and takes a while to load. So not only can making your website more performant or make it quicker, not only can that be a good thing from a carbon emissions point of view, but it can also make your customers or your clients a lot happier too, because they're able to access the information that they need a lot more quickly. So good example of a win-win situation. And we often find that paying attention to sustainability is a win-win situation. So have a look at these tools, see what kinds of insights they give you. And as I mentioned, a lot of it will be down to the media that you're using. If you're using big screen, big full screen images, loads of them everywhere. If you've got auto playing videos, that will also have a big impact. But some things will also be down to coding things in a sloppy way as well. So there may also be opportunities to talk to your development team and ask them, if you've got developers, ask them what they can do to make things better for you as well. As I say, win-win situations, so always happy. I'm interested to know, I think, Michael, maybe you said you knew that you had some improvements you needed to make on the website. If anybody has anything they'd like to share on that point. So if you know where you need to put some attention, I'd love to hear it. It'd be great to hear in the comments as to sort of what conclusions you've come to about what you specifically are going to try and do. Okay, so we've got that. And then the other thing that small businesses can be very aware of and vigilant on as well is doing something that we call a digital declutter. So, I mentioned to you that there is this idea that digital isn't physical. It just floats around, it's harmless. Now, when we all used to have offices full of paper, we knew how many records we were keeping that we probably didn't need. We would have a definitive amount of space in a filing cabinet or in a cupboard somewhere. And we knew that when we had too much, we'd need to clear something out. And the same is true of our digital, even though it's just a little bit less easy to visualize because it's not in a cupboard in the office, or it's not boxes of rubbish under your desks. It's hosted on somebody else's infrastructure, so it's a bit less easy to see. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention to what we're keeping. There is an environmental impact. There is an environmental cost of keeping all this stuff. And in the most basic of terms, every single thing that you're storing online somewhere is consuming energy because it's in the digital tech world somewhere. So I can see we've got some questions, so I'll come to those in a second. I'll just finish this slide first. So when we're talking about a digital declutter, this is asking you as a small business to think about deleting the data that you don't need. Think about the emails, the old files that you have, backups, old versions of things. Do you really need all of those? If you are a company that is, the second point is probably more applicable to tech firms. If you've spun up additional versions of websites, applications, you've maybe got testing environments, things like that. Can you power those down and turn them off? And then coming back to something that I do think is applicable to small businesses as well, many businesses are told that data is king or queen, that you need to be collecting data about what's happening on your website. You need to know exactly what people are doing. And yes, I do agree that that is true, but you don't need to be running that kind of data collection all the time. You don't need to be collecting data every single day of the week for years and years on end. The pictures that generally don't change all that much. So something you can have a chat with your development team is, if you are collecting analytical data, is do we really need to be running this all the time? Can we actually turn it off for a bit? Collect data for a month, a year, use that, and then the rest of the time, we don't need it. So there's some things to think about with the digital declutter. This is a really nice link I've included in the slides here. There's loads of guidance on digital decluttering, how to do it, where the most proportionate places for impact are to look. And that was developed in collaboration with an organization called Business Declares as well, which is a sort of climate related organization for businesses. So those are some hopefully very practical, hands-on things that you within your organization can do. And having a declutter, I mean, it always feels good, doesn't it? Whether it's physical or digital, I think it's always nice. Now, Michael, kindly, you asked me a question. And so thank you for the question. Thank you for the participation. You said, is there a particularly carbon efficient way of linking to YouTube and Vimeo videos? Is embedding a really heavy way of hosting them? That's a really, really great question. And thank you for asking, because videos will be one of the most impactful things that you can change on your website. So you can embed videos directly on your website, but there's two things where you can embed a video and like make it really, really heavy and bad. The first thing is that if you have an auto-playing video, instantly what happens is somebody loads up a web page and all that data is downloading immediately for the video to play. And videos are really, really big in file size. So auto-playing videos is a problem. If you don't have an auto-playing video, the other thing that you can do is you can still embed the video, and you can use a technique called lazy loading. Now, lazy loading is also a technique that applies to images as well. Now, lazy loading is a technique where, you know how like you might have a really, I don't know if you can see all my hands all the way top to bottom, where you might have a really long web page. And as you scroll down the web page, you start to see new content come up. So lazy loading is the idea that until somebody actually scrolls down the page, we're not going to load the data needed for that part of the page. So that's the same idea with images. That's the same idea with videos as well. So the idea with videos is that if you had a video a little bit further down the page, the data that's needed to play that video wouldn't load immediately. It would load when somebody gets there. And another way of thinking about that too is that none of the data loads until you actually press play on the video. Now, this is where you have a little bit of a balance thinking about user needs and sustainability. Not loading the data needed before you play the video might mean that it'll be slightly slower to start the video once they press play. If you're on a slower connection, you might have a little bit of a pause and a delay. But that is generally the best technique to think about, is actually not loading the data for the video until somebody actually presses play or sees it. And that is called a lazy loading technique. And if you Google lazy loading technique or pop onto a search engine, there's lots and lots of ways, lots of information about that, and lots of different ways that you can implement a technique like that. So, Michael, I hope that helps. And the other option, of course, is not to embed it at all on your page and link out to it on Vimeo or YouTube directly. So you could just have a screenshot of the image, which looks like a play button. You click that, and then you go straight over to the Vimeo or YouTube page. That's another option too. Again, with all of these things, you have to balance up the needs of the user versus these kinds of sustainability considerations. But I hope that helped. Okay, and we have a comment here from Jamie who's saying we are looking at a project to enhance our sustainability of our digital estate. Great, good for you, Jamie, good work. One of the quick wins is delivering content more efficiently using next-gen image formats such as WebP. Are there any tools that you would recommend for doing this? Fantastic. So thank you for that question. Yes, Jamie, it's a little hard to make a suggestion because I don't know specifically how your digital estate is made up. So, for example, how it's coded, are you using content management systems, etc. But what I would comment on is that is a fantastic way of thinking of optimizing your images. So great work. WebP is a more modern format for delivering images. The only thing you need to be a little bit careful of with WebP is that some older browsers can't handle a WebP image, so they don't actually know how to view it. So you might just need to think about what we would call fallback options. So if somebody's browser can't view the WebP image, what you would need is to serve up a format of image that they can use instead, so a JPEG. There's absolutely tons and tons of ways of doing that. But I'm sorry, it's a little tricky to suggest a specific tool for doing that. Typically, it would be something you would generate the WebP images on the server itself. So it would be a bit of a development thing that you would generate them on the fly. If you're using WordPress, for example, there's a really, really great tool called ShortPixel that I would look to use. I think it might interface with other non-WordPress sites. So images. I've popped that in the chat for you. So ShortPixel for WebP images. Great. Okay, so Jamie, I hope that helps. I'm going to move us on. It's 1:45. I've got a couple of other sections that I want to talk to you about, but that was probably the most relevant, useful, I hope, part of the session. And Hussein, I think I saw you typing. If you still wanted to ask a question, by all means do. I may come to it at the end, but please do feel comfortable asking your question. But you just did. Fantastic. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, I'll have a quick look at this. Could you calculate data centers' carbon emissions, but what about data transfer? Transferring data from a data center to the end user's client involves many networks, telecoms components, etc., and it's different from one location to another. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And that's quite a sort of technical question. There are lots and lots of methodologies out there that are open source that you can use for kind of calculating that kind of thing. We have a package available called co2.js, and there's some methodologies in there that you can follow. One methodology I would recommend to you is the sustainable web design methodology. I'm just going to type that in the chat for you because I don't think it's in the slides anywhere. So if you find that will sort of talk about this whole topic a little bit more. But essentially, you're absolutely right. There is a carbon emission cost involved with transferring the data from A to B. However, the latest research is actually suggesting that that infrastructure is there anyway, and it doesn't actually use any more or any less electricity depending on what you send through it. So actually, if it's the middle of the night and nobody's sending any data from A to B, that infrastructure is not using less energy. Whereas, say, in the middle of the day, at, I don't know, 11 a.m., where everybody's up and using the internet, we don't yet see any correlation with that infrastructure actually using more energy because more data is flying through it. So yes, but there is a cost, and you can sort of attribute that, but actually it's a bigger impact to think about where the data center actually is. That's what energy is powering that data center itself. So where the data is originating from, and also thinking about the energy that your end user is using as well. That bit in the middle is quite small fry. It does have some impact, and as you might be aware, there's also a speed implication. So the further across the globe you send data, the longer it takes. But actually, yeah, we can't see yet. There's not much research to show that there's a strong correlation in terms of the energy actually going up because we're sending data. Because all that stuff's switched on anyway, and it's always on standby, and that's the issue. It doesn't scale down when nothing's being sent through it. I hope that helps. I'm happy to chat further if you've got any more questions. That was a really good question, very pertinent, so thank you for asking it. Okay, we've got about 12 minutes, so I'm going to run through this stuff for you. Okay, so we started talking about the resource of energy, and a lot of people will often think about energy or the carbon emissions specifically as being the same as sustainability. And I think it's really important to understand that thinking about climate change and thinking about carbon emissions is not the same as sustainability. Sustainability is a much bigger umbrella term. There's a lot more going on to make something truly sustainable. There's a lot more ecosystems and a lot more that impacts ecosystems than just carbon emissions. So this is an absolutely fantastic diagram. We use it all the time at the Green Web Foundation. It's called carbon tunnel vision. It's this idea that when we were worried about our impact on the world around us, we become incredibly fixated on carbon emissions and kind of forget about all the other things that need attention as well. And so that brings me on nicely to thinking about rare raw minerals, which is a kind of resource we use that has an impact, but that maybe isn't quite so directly correlated to climate change, but is related to sustainability. I think this diagram is absolutely fantastic. This is an interpretation of the chemical periodic table. And what it's been done is it's been color coded and kind of messed around with to show you how many elements go into mobile phones. So I'm hoping you can see this well enough. You'll see that some of the elements have little white mobile phones or maybe little black mobile phones on them. I think there's about 21, if memory serves. There's 21 elements, many of them very rare, that go into our mobile phones. So this little mobile phone here is made up of quite a complicated supply chain of things. And if you look at the color coding, the things that are colored in things that are colored in green, they're abundant. We don't need to worry so much about those. But the things that are colored in red or black or orange, they're the things where we have issues. So where it's red, we know that actually we think there's not going to be enough in the future to maintain the level of consumption that we have at the moment. And I think there's 5 or 6 that go into our mobile phone currently that are red. And the ones that are coloured in black, I think there's 5 of those, again, that relate to mobile phones. Those are resources currently that come from conflict places. So really what I wanted to get across to you here is that this little mobile phone, which we often think of as a bit disposable, we maybe upgrade every 2 years, we drop it or we just buy a new one, whatever. Some of us maybe even have 2 phones, one for work, one from home. There's an awful lot of value in these things, these natural materials or these raw resources that come in. And hopefully this diagram gives you a bit of a sense of what those are. So at the moment, the way that we are consuming these resources is not sustainable. So manufacturing hardware, phones, laptops, data centers requires all sorts of rare raw materials. And some of those, just to name them, are things maybe you've heard of in the press: cobalt, lithium, and gold. And all of these have to be extracted from the earth. And despite what anybody says, there is no such thing as sustainable mining. If you mine something, you are going to massively impact that local environment, you are going to impact the water table, and you are going to impact the land, and you're going to use an awful lot of energy to do it. So it's just not possible to say that sustainable mining exists. Now, that's not to say that that's not to say that mining isn't of value. It is of value, but you have to weigh up the costs. Is what we're mining for valuable enough to warrant the impacts? And so to give you an idea, manufacturing a phone results in mining 1.2 tons of raw materials just to make this thing. And in 2019, 50 million tons of e-waste was produced, and recycling is actually really hard. And I think it's really important to understand that the recycling of e-waste is perhaps not what you imagine it to be at all. So this is an e-waste site based in Africa. This is in Ghana. It's in a place called Agbogbloshie. And actually what typically happens is that European countries export their e-waste. So when it's being recycled, it gets exported to places such as this. Now, what these young men are doing here in this photo is that they are burning old electrical cables in order to extract the copper from it. And that copper can be very valuable and can give them a livelihood. However, that is not a particularly healthy practice for the young men involved or for the community that lives around this e-waste site. So I don't know about you, but I always imagined e-waste would happen in a kind of regulated facility where, you know, that there were kind of industrial processes making this all safe and clean and healthy for people. And no, actually, the reality is that's just not the case. E-waste is not recycled in the way that you might imagine or hope for it to be. Now, I'm just kind of looking at time. I won't go into this too much more, but this whole e-waste site is a fantastic, fascinating example of the social and economic impacts around sustainability, and how we as the global north have a lot of responsibility and accountability to make up for, really, in how we manage our waste. So it's really worth looking into. So to bring this back into an SME context, how can you reduce your use of rare raw materials through digital? Well, ultimately, it boils down to some very, very simple things. We need to reframe the way we view these articles that we have. We need to review them as precious and not disposable. And ultimately, what that means is we need to keep them in use for longer and not upgrade or throw them away. So for small businesses, perhaps some of you might upgrade machines or phones as a perk to your team. Maybe you don't actually need to upgrade those machines, but you do it as a benefit or to make them feel good. You need to understand that there is an impact for doing that. So that's maybe, if not as much of a perk as maybe you think. Repairing devices rather than throwing them away is a very valuable thing that you can do. If you do have to buy something new to you, perhaps consider a refurbished or second-hand device, and also consider the repairability of a device when you do buy it new. If you have a cupboard of shame, I know a lot of organizations do. You might have a tech cupboard of shame somewhere in your office. Consider whether, rather than just leaving that stuff there to rot, is there a way that you could donate it and put it back into useful society? There's lots and lots of charities and organizations that do that. They will accept your unneeded things, fix them and put them back into use. And again, as a small business, perhaps you might consider policies such as bring your own device to work. So we don't all need 2 mobile phones, one for work, one for home. Do we really need a laptop for work and a laptop for home? A bring your own device policy is one that makes it acceptable for somebody to use, say, a work device as a personal device and vice versa. And you can do a lot to not only save money, but also to reduce the CO2 emissions of the devices and the impacts of the rare raw materials. So I'll just pause here to see if anybody's got any questions or discussions, and we'll whiz through the land and water section. Patricia has, so I'll just come back to the chat. So Hussein, thanks for you said thanks for the answer. However, I think there are some correlations. You're right, there are some correlations, but they're not, as I was trying to explain, they're not as big as you might think. But it is technical, so you're quite right. But I welcome you to get in touch and we can have a nerdy conversation on email sometime if you like. You can find me at the Green Web Foundation. And Patricia has said the same thing with recycling. Countries in the EU have had containers returned from Asia, which I applaud, with unrecyclable materials and garbage. So yes, Patricia, you're drawing attention to the fact that it's not just e-waste, which we ship off to other countries to be processed. It's all kinds of materials for processing. So really, it's on us not to be generating this stuff for recycling in the first place. There's that old phrase, isn't there? Reduce, reuse, recycle, and recycle is at the bottom of the pile. It's actually much better to reduce what we're producing in the first place, reuse it or repair it if we can as the next phase, and then recycle as something at the bottom. Okay, now I know I've only got 2 minutes left. Michael, you've asked a question. I will come back to that in a minute, but I'm just going to finish the last of these slides, and I don't want to overrun and keep you from the rest of your day for too long. I did want to just touch on land and water, and I will do that very quickly. A lot of people don't realize that digital technology has a clear and strong relationship to the use of water as well. And really, I mean, there's two ways that we can see this. We can see it in relation to the manufacturing, but we can also see it in relation to data centers. As I've said to you many times before, data centers and your data do not float in the cloud. They do exist somewhere, and they do create localized impacts on communities. Now, to give you an example, a medium-sized data center that's about 15 megawatts, so that would serve a city, for example, uses as much water as 3 average-sized hospitals per year. I believe that there's good examples of data centers being built globally in water-stressed areas. So this is an example I found around in Santiago in, I think, Chile. The Google wanted to build a data center that they estimated would use 169 liters of water per second. And they wanted to build this in an area that was already facing a mega drought. And this stuff doesn't just happen in the global south. There's also lots of examples of this kind of pushback happening from local communities in Ireland and the Netherlands, for example, as well. So it is important to understand that there is a correlation between water usage and tech as well. It's not just electricity, and it's not just the rare raw material. See, it's hard to say that I mentioned earlier as well. And really, the kind of that upshot is that none of the world's top industries, and that includes digital tech, would actually be profitable if they paid fairly for the natural capital that they're using. So right now, all this free tech that we're given access to, free starter programs, free use of Google Cloud, or free use of all this stuff, there is a cost. It's just not us that's bearing it at the moment. It's the world around us. So just to put that into context, how can you as a small business help with this kind of thing? Well, whereas the other two things I was able to give you some very, very direct correlations, you know, you can change data center, you can hold on to your tech. When it comes to challenging water and land use, really, the best advice that I can give you is to ask questions about tech use, particularly tech use in the cloud, so particularly around AI. If you are being encouraged to use AI to solve your business problems, I would strongly push back and wonder whether Do you really need these AI tools? Knowing the impacts that they cause, is it really worth it? And will they actually solve your real business problems? And if you're being offered something for free, ask them, okay, can you tell me, please, about the water usage and the environmental claims? Asking these questions, even as a small independent business, if enough people do it, it really does shift the dial more than you might appreciate. It really, really does. And I could tell you stories about how it shifts the dial, but I'm very aware that I've run over, so I won't go into them. But I just ask you to trust me when I say you have more power than you realize when you ask these questions to these big data centers or to any tech provider. If you show you care, they do listen. They do want to know. Okay, so I'll skip that bit and I'll just sum up, and I'll say that building and running tech definitely uses natural resources. We've touched the surface, and hopefully I've just given you a little bit of an insight into energy, rare raw materials, and land and water use. And the part I skipped over, I'll just give you the sort of one sentence headline, is that when we think about natural resource use, it's not just the stuff we're taking from the environment and the ecosystems we're impacting. There are also social impacts to the people that live there as well. Sustainability, true sustainability, is as much about people and society and social impacts as it is about preserving the natural world around us. So I'll leave it there. Apologies for running a few minutes over. I'm happy to stay on the line and answer any questions. I know that a few comments have come in, so I'm happy to stay on the line and answer those. And to say thank you all so much for coming and for being so chatty as well, and for being present in the comments. It really, really helps, and it makes the session feel so much more engaging and rewarding for everyone. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Hannah. That's been fantastic. Really quite, eye-opening. There's a lot of things there that I wasn't even aware of, and I say I wasn't aware of, like I'm a professional in. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, then feel free to email the economic development team, or Hannah. What I'm going to do, I will send out all the slide decks to everybody that was participating today, so you'll have a copy of that as well. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. And thank you. I'm just absolutely delighted that your department have been so forward thinking in bringing this topic to businesses in your area. And it's been a real delight to come along today. So thank you for thank you for the invite. Thanks for the opportunity to share this with everyone. It's really appreciated.
Lovely. No, thank you.
Great. And I'll just, if it's okay with you, Andy, I'll just pick up on the one comment there that's outstanding, which is from Hussein. Hussein, definitely, it sounds interesting, really, really interesting what you're doing. You say you're working on a research project proposal about the sustainability issues of storing files on the cloud. I would love to be interested. I'd love to be involved. We have a lot of expertise on this within the Green Web Foundation. Just drop me a line through our support form on the website. It's probably the easiest way to get hold of me. I'd love to hear about what you're doing, and we'd love to contribute in any way that we possibly can. It would be our pleasure. It's what we live for. It's what we do. Great. Okay, well, we'll leave it there, and just thank you again, everyone. I hope you found it useful, and do reach out to me if there's anything you want to chat about.
Thank you. Take care then.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.